very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101 on a Wednesday evening, uh, just past 6:30 in Guyana. If you're in North America, it would be 3:30. No, 6:30 in North America. I think we have the same time as Guyana. Welcome everyone to Politics 101, Guyana, the wider Caribbean, North America, Europe, of course. There'll be quite a few hours ahead of Guyana. And those of you in Cayenne and, uh, and, and Paramaribo, Suriname, some of you in Venezuela and Brazil, welcome to Politics 101. Tonight we're going to be doing some checks and balances. We're having the political parties on to give their take on the news of the day. The opposition political parties, PNC, and the AFC, the WPA, and the Guyana Nation Builders, they are going to be on tonight to give us their take on the issues of the day. You know, these, as some of you would remember, this show, like many others on this platform, came on stream because the opposition parties, in the wake of the 2020 elections, were basically denied full coverage on the mainstream media. As you would remember, many of the mainstream media took partisan sides during the 5 months of the election and afterwards. I think we've seen some shift in that back to some normalcy as far as media coverage are concerned. But during those 5 months and immediately after, opposition parties were not given adequate coverage and fair coverage on the mainstream media. And as a result of that, we created some of these programs in order to give the opposition view. And so therefore we managed to hold the line as far as coverage was concerned. As I said, things seem to be coming a little bit back to normal. There's more balanced coverage, even though in some instances there are some things that are not allowed to be discussed. You know, the election narrative that challenges the one that is espoused by the ruling party, that narrative is not given the same kind of coverage. As I've said, you know, the 2020 elections threw up two results. One result that was based on the raw count in the boxes, and another result that was based on an audit of the votes in the boxes, meaning the process by which the votes in the box got there. And as a result of that audit, we learned that quite a lot of the votes that got into the box got there by means other than fair means. We learned of people who were not in the country who voted, people who died voted. We learned of boxes without statutory documents, which meant that the votes in those boxes may have been tampered with. We learned of boxes from one region finding themselves in another region, all kinds of things we learned as a result of the audit. The recount threw up two results, like I said, the raw votes in the boxes, and then audited votes And so we had an election with two results. The court instructed GCOM to go with one result, and that is the result in the boxes. And their argument was that the audited count should have to go to a petition. Would have to go to a petition. So, so we had two results, but the mainstream media carries the narrative about one result, that is the result in the boxes, that was used to install the PPP into office, to use a term that was introduced by the US State Department. That is that the government was installed as a result of what they later call a disputed election. And it had to be a disputed election because there were two results, basically. When you have two results, it's a disputed election. That is why Chief Election Officer Mr. Lowenfield said that he could not certify the election. And note, Mr. Lowenfield is charged with misconduct and has been put before the courts. And the PPP, one would assume, would have a slam dunk case based on what they've proffered. And so therefore, the question is, why don't they bring Mr. Lowenfield before the court? They've also charged Mr. Mingo and Walter Lawrence. What is happening with these cases? If you're claiming that Mr. Mingo declared false results and Walter Lawrence signed off on those false results, then you have a clear case. Bring the cases before the court. You're claiming that Mr. Lowenfield committed some offense, bring it before the court. Why is the PPP not wanting these cases to come before the court? Why don't they want the elections petition to come before the court? You see, if they bring Mr. Lowenfield's case before the court, Mr. Lowenfield will have to introduce evidence. And he will introduce the evidence from the recount, the audit, that will bring before the court all of that, those anomalies that the opposition call. So they're not in a hurry to bring these cases before the court, because if these cases are brought before the court, the defense in the cases will lead evidence to show that what went on, and the recount has thrown up the evidence. So they charge these people, they don't want them to come before the court. They don't want the elections petition to come before the court because they fear the evidence which the defense will put before the court. They don't want the petitions to come before the court. Again, they fear the evidence. So there we have it. The mainstream media doesn't talk about the audited count. They don't at all, and they don't allow any discussion of it. And so therefore there is still a need for programs like these, where we get to hear from the opposition. And every other week I intend to bring the opposition representatives here so that they can give their view or their views on the situation. And so this evening we're going to have 4 representatives, representatives from the PNC, the WPA, the AFC, and the Guyana Nation Builders. And we are going to be getting their views on the issues that are before us. Quite a lot of issues before us. We have the issue of Miss Shaunet Bollers, who was allegedly assaulted by a prominent member in the society. And the police have not yet weighed in on this matter. We see the new commissioners come in and he's talking about all kinds of other things, but he's not touching this issue of a policewoman who has alleged that a prominent member of the society abused her racially. We assume there was some gender issues here. The police they've not touched it. They've not touched it. So it's still an issue that is being treated as a non-issue. It took 1 week for the mainstream media to report on it. It was circulating on social media for over a week before the mainstream media weighed in on it. So we want to talk about that because you see that issue is loaded with issues of prejudice and power. It has become a pattern for male members of a particular group who are members of the elite to behave in certain ways in public. You know, we go back to the beginning of the year or late last year when one minister said an entire group of people in the society don't have role models, in a sense insinuating that the group has deep flaws. And there was a big cry out over that. A few weeks later, we had another male minister going into the House of Assembly and addressing a female member of parliament, using very flowery sexual terms, talking about dildo. A new first in our parliament, and I dare say in the parliament of the English-speaking Caribbean. And now we have this prominent member of the society, you know, referring to a female policewoman in very derogatory terms. And we said alleged because the police is here to speak out on it. And if we were to go back a little bit earlier, we had the instance of Member of Parliament Sarbo Hali, who had alleged that a male member of the PPP had actually physically assaulted her. The police came back and said there was no evidence of it, disposed of it. So we are noticing these males with privilege, mostly of one group, but not exclusively of that group, carrying on in public, bringing their prejudices. And we are working on the theory that when groups of people feel that they are not going to be sanctioned, that they're free to do certain things, say certain things, behave in a certain manner, and not be sanctioned, they're more than likely to go ahead and do the things that they're doing. And talking about sanction, the police has not sanctioned any of those persons that I've talked there about. The president and his government have not sanctioned any of those persons that I've talked about. The Indian Guyanese interest groups, whether they're religious interest groups or cultural interest groups, or they're big commentators in the newspapers and otherwise, they have not condemned any of those instances. So one has to come to the conclusion that either they believe that some people ought not to be sanctioned, or they basically want to reduce these infractions to something less than an infraction. But we've not heard from the government, we've not heard from the ruling party, we've not heard from the Indian Guyanese interest groups, we've not heard from the Indian Guyanese social commentators, we've not heard from the police. The police represent the state. The PNC represents, the PPP represents the government. And the interest group represents civil society. None of them has spoken out. When the state, the government, and civil society do not speak out of an issue, on an issue like that, then it says to us that they are in effect condoning that kind of behavior. And I want to talk to the opposition parties about that, because political parties have to take a lot of blame. Political parties in Guyana have not learned how to talk about race, and understandably so. Political parties are not interest groups. Political parties are what they are. They are in the business of recruiting people to run for office, running for office, and running government. That's what political parties are about. Running for office and running government. Interest groups are about trying to influence government policy without running for government. So the two are two different kinds of organizations. Political parties don't like to talk about race because race is a bad thing. Racism is a bad thing. And political parties don't like to talk about bad things unless it's going to win them some votes. Anything that they perceive will lose them from votes, will lose votes, they don't deal with it. That is why we tend to be frustrated that political parties don't deal with race. They only deal with it in ways that allow them to win votes. But when it comes to the possibility of leaving votes, political parties don't talk about race. The problem for us in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean is that often political parties are, especially in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, political parties are the race, and the race are political parties. You cannot separate race from political party in those two countries. And that is the problem for political parties in Guyana and Trinidad and Suriname when it comes to talk about race. They benefit from race. Yet, they could lose as a result of race. And so they'll find themselves in that thing. If you want to get political parties in Guyana to trip all over themselves, ask them about race. They give you all tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Because they don't want to talk about it, because it could potentially lose votes for them. That's the reality we have to deal with. But my argument is that they should talk about it because it could potentially win votes to them. Can you imagine if black people get vexed with the PNC and decide they're going to stay home or they're going to give their vote to somebody else? The PNC done with. Can you imagine if Indian Guyanese get vexed with the PPP and decide they're going to stay home or they're going to give their vote to somebody? The PPP is done with. So more than parties in other parts of the Caribbean, political parties in Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname have a responsibility to address race. So the Bullers issue is still out there. We have the issue of Mr. Hicken, who's known to be partial to the PPP. I don't think it's any secret anymore. Everybody knows that. And Mr. Hicken was appointed as acting commissioner in circumstances that appear to collide with the Constitution. It says that the president must consult with the opposition. The president must also consult with the Police Service Commission, which must consult with its members. And none of that was done because there's no Police Service Commission and there was no opposition leader. And so the view in many parts is that the president acted outside of the Constitution. The government, of course, has cited the doctrine of necessity. The question is where does responsibility to the Constitution ends and the doctrine of necessity kick in? Where? The court will have to decide that. And I hope the opposition makes good on his threat to go to court on this matter and let the court rule once and for all and set a precedence so we would not have this kind of situation going forward. We would not have this kind of situation going forward. Over to GECOM. Lots is happening there. We notice in today's papers that they're re-advertising for 2 positions, which they've already advertised for, shortlisted people, but we understand that the government commissioners do not like the people. And so they've used their majority. I say their majority because the chairman is voting with them at every twist and turn. And instead of going with the shortlisted people that they don't necessarily like, they are re-advertising the position. My goodness gracious. Does it get worse? Does it get worse? Mr. Aubrey Norton, the leader of the PNC, was on this program last week. And he suggested that one of the ways of ensuring that we have some kind of balance there at GECOM is that we should pass legislation to relieve the chair of the commission of the casting vote. What that would mean is that if there is a tie, as there often is, rather than using the chair using his or her vote to break the tie, the chair would instead push for consensus. So there's no, if that were to happen, you will now have an incentive for consensus. I think it's a novel idea. Dr. Jeffrey last night added that what could also happen is that we can have a chair and a deputy chair. and that the two of them have to agree. So these are novel suggestions as to how we can deal with the situation at GECOM. Don't ever believe that the political parties are going to ever give up a political presence of GECOM to so-called civil society. So the political commission, to my mind, is going to remain. The question is what to do about the chair. And I thought that that was another suggestion there. The question of the voters list is still up in the air. You know, we were talking about the new voters list from as far back as 2001. I remember in 2006, the slogan of the PNC was no verification, no election. So this voters list is not a new thing. It goes right back to 2006. It was in 2006 PPP realized, and we are hearing this from internal sources, people like Henry Jeffrey, who was in the cabinet at the time, that it was at that time they realized that the Indian Guyanese section of the population was beginning to dwindle as a result of migration. And the PPP took a conscious decision to find other means, O-T-H-E-R, other means to win election, meaning they took a decision to start rigging elections from then. And one of the tools that they discovered that was pregnant, 20 months pregnant, not 9 months pregnant, 29 months pregnant, with possibilities of rigging, was the voters list. Almost 15 years later, we're still talking about this voters list. To get the voters list, for us to get a new voters list, we'll have to have consensus between the two groups, the two parties, and the PPPs not going to agree to any new voters list until they are pushed to agree to a new voters list. I noticed the PNC leader said that the PNC is warning GECOM not to go to an election without a new voters list. What is not clear is whether the PNC will draw a line in the sand and say, we will not contest an election without a new voters list. That is not clear. But until we can get a new voters list, until we can get rid of happy hour at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the last hour of polling, when it's a free-for-all, 5 to 6 is a free-for-all in Guyanese election. That's when you take out statutory documents. That's when you stuff the boxes. Unless we get a new voters list, unless we are able to deal with the question of happy hour, unless we are able to deal with the question of the chairperson of GECOM, we are going nowhere as far as free and fair elections in Guyana are concerned. We will always get two results. Because make no bones about it, the 2020 has become a precedent. What is that precedent? That you can now seek to correct perceived wrongs of an election before an election is ended. After that, if you had any perceived wrong, you have to go to a petition. When the PPP said that they saw Mingo doing something at GECOM and they went to the courts Had the court said that is not our business, bring that to a petition, we would not have set a precedent, but the court said GECOM can correct it. And ultimately, GECOM decided to correct it with recount. A recount which in effect became an election petition hearing. So we have now set the precedence in Guyana, where you don't correct an election at a petition, you correct it while the election is going on. Mark my words. Mark my words. 2020 has set some serious precedents in our country as far as elections are concerned. Welcome to Politics 101. I notice you're all here. I'm just warming you all up because we have our panel coming up, and I'm going to ask them some of these hard questions. As I've said, political parties don't like to answer certain difficult questions because political parties are not just groups. They're not churches. They are not penny banks. They are in the business of getting votes, winning an election, and running government. I don't think political parties even are concerned about what's the role of a political party in opposition. You ask the average political party member that question, what's the role of an opposition party? They will start to stutter because parties do not gear up for being in opposition. If you ask them what's the role of party in government, oh Lord, the answers will come off the tongue like butter coming off hot frying pan. But ask them what's the role of the opposition. They won't tell you because political parties do not take into consideration being in opposition. That's why they're very lousy in opposition. Unless opposition means undermining the government and getting rid of the government. Oh God, if you ask them that, fine. And that is what opposition has meant in Guyana. It has meant undermining the government, seeking ways to depose the government, never cooperating with the government. And government means undermining the opposition, keeping the opposition out, and taking all the power. That's what government means. Politics 101. We have to do some of that, always to get ourselves up to speed. Let me bring in the panel. I think some of them are here with us. I think Tabitha Sarabo is here. Mr. Sherwin, Mr. Sherwin Older from the PNC is here. I don't see him. And I'm getting no, there you go. Mr. Takumo Gunse is not here, it seems. I know Mr. Kemrat Ramjatan was coming in a little bit late, but it seems as though we have Tabitha and Sherwin here. Tabitha and Sherwin, welcome to Politics 101. I hope you all don't beat me up for beating up on political parties. In fact, you all would be in order to call me a hypocrite because I belong to a political party myself. So in a sense, I was beating up on myself. This morning on one of my programs, a caller on my program, I was on Kidaki program, and a caller got very mad with me. He said, "Look, you have to decide whether you are a university lecturer or you're a political leader. Which one you are?" You know? And the truth of the matter is that I'm both, but don't tell that to a regular citizen or a voter who is going through hell from the PPP and want us to be real political leaders. They don't want no lecturer and all that kind of stuff now. That is for when they go to university, what they want are political leaders, and I understand the frustration out there. Let me start you all off with the issue of GCOM, because I think that's a very important arena of contestation. Because unless we get that GCOM thing right, we are not going to have anything that comes close to a free and fair election in Guyana. Tabitha, let me start with you. Are you optimistic that we are going to be able to get the GCOM thing right, the new voters list, settle the problem of an independent chair? Are you optimistic that you're going to be able to do that in short?
Good evening to you, Dr. Hines. Good evening to you, Sherwin, and your viewers. I don't think optimism or optimistic is the right word to use. I think we have to be very pragmatic where this particular issue is concerned. I think we're in a place where the PPP is comfortable. They believe that they don't have to budge in terms of their stance and their views on how it is they're going to move forward in terms of elections, in terms of the Elections Commission, in terms of running the country. And so the opposition and all those who may not necessarily deem themselves opposition, but recognize that there's some issues with GCOM, would have to make a decision as to the strategy that will be used to push back against this. So it's not about being optimistic, but recognizing that there are a lot of issues to be resolved, and we cannot go to our next elections without these issues being resolved. Now, the way in which we get to that, it would need a lot of strategic thinking and ways in which we recognize the issues and recognize that without some serious strategies that we will not be able to get the PPP to budge on a number of these matters. It will not be easy, but it's something that we have to recognize that we can't go to another elections in the same space under these same circumstances. And so we need to be able to push back on it and push back on it. I think very tough. I don't think this is something where we should be willing to waver on or compromise on. The compromising would come with what it should look like, in the sense that there may be various views as to what, we can't necessarily get an independent elections commission, but we can get an elections commission where both, especially the major groups in the country, would feel as if at least there is some amount of representation that would probably go sway in either their ways, depending on the issue that would arise. So I think it's a case where one, we need to look at what works in other places. I was looking quite recently at what South Africa has in terms of how it is that they come up with who is on the commission and who chairs the commission. And it's a bit different from what we have here. So there are different countries that have different models as to what an independent election commission looks like. Whether we could get to the word actual independent may be a bit of a stretch. But recognizing that what we have is not going to work and looking at models that do exist and finding ways to create something that will work in the Guyana's context. And I think we need to start looking at that right now. But it would not be easy.
What do you think, Tabitha? What do you think about the suggestions by Mr. Norton of taking away the casting vote from the chair of the commission?
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Because the same thing with the presidency. Depending on who is sitting in that chair, half of the society would believe that they would not be acting in the interest of the other half of society. And so I don't think any one person should have a casting vote with these particular matters, such as an election, which will determine what happens in a country for the next 5 years, should be in the hands of any one individual. And so I agree with him on that point.
Let me bring you in, Mr. Holder, chairman of the People's National Congress. Whatever happens at the end of the day at GCOM, your party would have a major role to play as one of the two major political parties in the country. Your leader has put forward that suggestion of taking away the casting vote, and it seems to be quite popular because it's a reasonable and creative suggestion. But the question of the voters list, your party has said to GCOM that it ought not to go to an election without a new and clean voters list. What your party didn't say was whether, in fact, they are prepared to go to an election if the list is not clean. Without giving away party secrets, what is your party's position really as it relates to the voters list?
All right, thanks, Dr. Hines. Good night to you. Good night to Bita. Good night to your viewers. Our position is that, and we've made it quite clear to GCOM that they should not go into another election without a clean list. That position is very public for us. And I've said that in no uncertain terms to the GCOM Commission when we met a few weeks back. But the question you're asking me is if we're willing to not participate, I suspect, in the election, we're willing to draw that line. At this stage, I wouldn't say yes or no. I wouldn't tie it only to a clean list because there are a number of mechanisms there, and we have to examine it holistically. There are a number of things that could be done to give us that confidence that the election will be free and fair. For example, we've said to GCOM that they should be looking at biometrics, for example. That might be one area in which you can prevent dead voters or persons who are overseas. So there are a number of things that we have to look at to ensure that the elections are free and fair. So I wouldn't say at this point that we will draw that line, but what I'm saying is that we will definitely agitate and do all that is necessary to ensure that the elections are free and fair. One of the pillars of a free and fair election, as we put it, it's for a clean voters list. So whatever mechanism GCOM decides on or whatever is agreed upon, it has to ensure that we have to be comfortable that the elections will be free and fair. And I believe, at some point in time, we will have to draw that line.
If everything were to be fixed, except the voters list, do you believe that there could be a free election, a free and fair election, with everything else fixed, but the voters list still bloated?
No, given what I've seen in the last election, what we've all seen in the last election, and the ruling of the court, which to my mind sets a certain precedence. I don't see us being very comfortable, even if you cross all the other T's and dot the I's. A clean voters list is essential. I know what I'm saying, a clean voters list, whether it's new and clean or whatever mechanism. The point is that on that list, only legitimate voters should be voting at the election. And once that is satisfied, then we will be comfortable.
Tabitha, let me bring you in here. Let's talk about elections for a minute. And I'm posing this question to both of you. Sherwin, you've pointed us in that direction. What are some of the big lessons that we've learned from 2020, the 2020 election, that we have to ensure that does not repeat itself?
Should I start?
Yes, go right ahead.
Sorry. Well, to be quite frank, the first place we have to look at is what we would have done wrong or what we should have done better. And then you look outwards to what GCOM could have done better. And I think if we were to be quite frank, we made a lot of missteps in terms of our polling agents and what happened in some of those polling booths. Because when you look at what happened on the East Coast, for example, something went wrong there on a number of fronts, including where were our polling agents. And so when you look at, you have to be quite frank where that is concerned. And so we need to be able to tighten up on that side to make sure that those persons who are in those polling stations and that are representing us are doing so effectively and can raise any issues quite early with us so that we're aware of what is going on in all of those stations. So that is one of the things I would forthrightly say. The other aspect is that and when you look at the observer reports, you would see that basically everything was fine on elections day. Things seem to be, everybody seemed to be pleased with how smooth things ran, except the specific hiccups that may have happened in one or two places, which shows us that there are a lot of groundwork that happens before the elections. Whatever happens on March 2nd happened because there was preparation before March 2nd, and we were not aware of those things. And so in terms of intelligence gathering and all of those things, I think we need to be more aware of that and understand what is happening on the ground in our communities. I don't think we did a good job with those things are concerned. Now, of course, on the other side, in terms of GCOM, yes, we know about the list. We went to court on the whole issue of the list. The Chief Justice said that they don't need to clean the list. How do you respond when the court does not come back in your favor? And so those are things that we have to battle with. Right now, the court has said one thing. And so if it is that we are going to deal with it, is it that we have to go back to the court? Can we go back to the court at this point? Because the elections rules say that there's 28 days, and after those 28 days, can you actually go back and see at this particular juncture that what the Chief Justice said, we don't agree with it, and now take it to a different court? Is that even something that is still possible at this stage? So those things we have to look at. And also the reality is what you saw come out at the recount showed to me that I'm not talking about the ballot boxes alone, but the decisions that were made and unmade and all of those things suggest to us that GCOM in it of itself requires a lot of changes. It's one thing to deal with the voters list. Yes, the chair, there needs to be an issue where the chair is concerned, but also how they deal with decision making when there are difficult circumstances during the elections period, I think needs to be looked at and interrogated and determine how it is do we respond when difficulties arise. Do you make a decision and then change decision the next minute? And so you're moving the goalpost every time something comes up that may not necessarily be in your favor or not. And so there are a lot of things that have to be looked at. And so the bigger picture is, everybody says there's electoral reform is required. There's some constitutional reform that is required. I'm in a particular some sessions right now where they're talking about electoral reform and what is required at different stages of the electoral process. And what happens in the United States, for example, is that there should be a period after the elections where you have a period of determining whether there were any issues before an actual declaration or a formal declaration is made. And so you don't wait until after somebody's actually sworn in to say, well, you know what, something went wrong and let's go to court. So do we need to change the dynamic of when it is you can query formally what is happening during the elections and happen on the day of elections? Or do we like what currently exists, where somebody has to be sworn in, somebody has to become president, and then you can say, oh, I'm going to the court to say because I had an issue with something that happened in a particular polling station, which does not change because that person remains president as the court goes through their process, and it could just stretch the process out, and you don't actually get the issues resolved. So all of those things I think we need to look at. I think the issue of electoral reform has to be has to become an issue that we look at, and we look at it seriously before the next elections as well. So those are some of the things that I think we need to look at moving forward.
Sharon, your party, I'm sure, would have gone through lots and lots of sessions, looking at the election, analyzing the election, the outcomes. I don't say results, the outcomes of the elections. Apart from the voters list, what are some other things that must be dealt with before you go to another election?
Well, I think Tabitha brought it out clearly in her explanation. There clearly some procedures, etc. GCOM needs to be fixed, and to our mind, the whole concept of electoral reform has to begin at GCOM. That is why we've asked GCOM to do an internal review of the 2020 elections. I believe, or we believe rather, in the PNC that the majority of these issues that occurred during that election can be resolved. For example, we're looking at the ROs, for example. The ROs, one second, Dr. Hines. Something is happening here. Can you hear me,
yeah,
Dr. Hines?
We're hearing you. We're hearing you.
Yes, I was saying to you, the reforms must begin at GCOM. It must begin at GCOM. That's why we have asked GCOM to look back and review the 2020 elections. Let's correct whatever procedural issues there were, whatever problems would obviously be highlighted during that review, and then we can go forward to new elections. Now, you had in the recount, you had clear cases of statutory documents being absent. You had cases of dead voters, persons who migrated, and we're saying if you have an internal review of the 2020 elections, then you can able to really map out what exactly transpired, where the errors were made, and you could be able to correct many of them. But instead, what you find is that 3 commissioners are pushing for it. Those are our coalition commissioners. And the other side seem not to want to engage in an internal review. I believe up to today's date, the decision is that there should be a review. But the issue is when this review will occur. There is no date, there is no time frame for when GCOM will actually do a review on the 2020 election. So that is a very, very sad situation. But I believe any electoral reform has to begin at GCOM. Something to look at is in the 2020 election is the fact that multiple reports were submitted by the CEO. And I'm saying that we need to correct that. Going forward, can a CEO determine on his own volition, this is how he will tabulate the votes, or this is the report that he will put forward? We have to look at that. We have to look at the process in which this final report is submitted. That is very, very important. I believe that is key. Is it that it needs to be discussed at the commission amongst the commissioners and then it's submitted to the CEO? Something, that is left to be determined. But all I'm saying is that we have to go back and look at the processes, examine where the errors were made, where the mistakes are, where the loopholes are for the skullduggery, and we have to tighten on them. But unfortunately, we have a government in place who, through the 5 months, made all sorts of outrageous claims, and through the last year and a half, continue to point to the opposition call us all sorts of names and riggers and all sorts of names, but they're unwilling. They're quite unwilling to, one, allow the petition to go forward so that we can properly examine the issues, properly examine what occurred. You know, they're not willing to go forward with the review of the 2020 election, even an internal review. And one would have thought that now they're in government, they would be happy to do just that, so that we can expose whatever needs to be exposed. But, you know, they're saying one thing to the general public, but they're doing quite the opposite. And so we're really in a bad place here in terms of electoral reform.
Sharwin, a lot of people in the audience are asking, what is your party's position vis-a-vis these electoral reforms? We have heard you talk a lot about what the PPP is doing. What is your party doing?
Currently, we are looking at massive, wide-ranging electoral reform. We are currently consulting internally. As I said, when I met with GCOM, I actually put a few things to them. For example, the biometrics, the issue of using biometrics, a number of other reform measures we are looking at currently, but I wouldn't want to let it out at this point in time. But we have a team of lawyers internally looking at it, looking at all scenarios and working out a formula. Of course, some kind of decision, some kind of agreement will have to be made with the other political parties, with the government, and with GCOM of itself. So we're working on that. That is something that we will more than likely release to the public in a short period of time.
In a short period of time. Let me go over Tabitha Sarbo. Let me go over to the Shawnette Bollers incident. I don't need to repeat the details here. It is well known. Are you concerned that the police has not yet even issued a statement on this matter?
It is concerning, and this is concerning on two levels for me. One is that this is a fellow police officer, and normally, when things that are of police nature and the police is actually the target or the victim of something, you would normally expect that the police would rally around their own. And in this instance, that is not happening at all. The silence is deafening where this is concerned. And so that shows to me where exactly we're heading. The second thing is that because of the racial aspect of it, that and the fact that the police recognizing this, it's double worrying. Because once it's a police issue, you normally rally around the police. But now this is an ethnic issue, and the majority of the police force are of the same ethnicity of the victim, allegedly the victim. And you hear nothing from the police. It's like nobody wants to deal with the matter. They want to, I think, pretend it didn't happen. And I think it is worrying as a society that this is how the police responds to their own on a matter of this nature. What happens with the rest of society? If you're going to look at your own and decide that you don't have to defend your own, then where are the rest of us? How do we deal? And it is striking. It is saddening. We're in a very bad place. We're in a very bad place. This is we know this is somebody of high standing, the young man that allegedly committed these acts. But I cannot understand this level of silence from the entire society almost. It's almost as if people are hoping and praying that this gentleman comes out and says something that they could agree with so that they could say, well, the girl was lying. And so because he has not yet said anything, everybody is unsure as how to respond, because of course you can't believe a Black woman. So there's nothing left to say. And so it's worrying. And the commissioner that is now there, albeit as I believe illegally, he's walking around the streets of Georgetown trying to pretend to be a man of the people. And one of his own was targeted, and he has nothing to say about that. So I think we have a long way towards a society where that is concerned.
Sharon, as your leader of the party picked up the phone and called the commissioner of police and said, this matter is very serious. It involves a young woman who's a police, but more than that, it goes to the heart of an issue that is central to what's happening in Guyana, and that is the issue of race. As your leader picked up the phone and called the commissioner of police and says that we, as a formal opposition party that is representing half of the population, we are asking you to mount an investigation. Have you written to the commissioner?
I can't say that leaders called or have written to the commissioner of police. You would know that the whole issue of the commissioner of police is a contentious issue at this point in time. We as a party don't even recognize him as the commissioner of police. So I'm not certain that I understand the seriousness of the situation, but I'm not certain that it would be the best thing to do to even recognize him at this point, given that we intend to challenge that his ascension to the highest seat in the force. We intend to challenge that in the court. What I can say to you is that our leader did pick up the phone and he called the victim, the alleged victim. He did speak with her to get a full sense of what transpired. Our party at our last General Council moved a motion in support of her, calling on the police force, calling on the government, calling on civil society groups, calling on the Bar Association, calling on Women and Gender Equality Commission. None of those organizations, as Tabitha rightfully highlighted, all of them are silent. All of them are silent. Here is an Afro-Guyanese woman, police woman, being assaulted by someone in high office, and you know it's the silence is deafening. Dr. Hines, I believe that I heard Tabitha on the silence of the police, but I believe that they're hamstrung. I believe that they're afraid of this PPP government. I believe that given that all that has occurred over the last 2 years during this administration, where you have ministers of government openly violating the rights of women, openly abusing women. Tabitha herself has been the subject of abuse by a minister of government in the parliament. And so when you see these things occurring and there is no pushback from the government seemed to be complicit in the whole issue, then you would have a police force that will not act. And so while we call on the police force to act on this, I'm not certain that they will, especially with Mr. Hickins now at the helm, who to my mind has been following orders to the T during the PPP time before 2015, and now again they have now appointed him as acting commissioner of police. So I don't see the police force doing anything about this issue.
Okay. Once again, another issue that is left hanging in the air. I did say that political parties don't like to deal with the issue of race, but it seems to me that this is more than race, as that has hinted, that it's really getting to the very soul of our society. And although I am in sympathy with political parties for not putting race at the top of the agenda, I'm afraid that at the end of the day, if this issue of racial discrimination, open racism is not dealt with, we are going to have a problem on our hands that even the political parties are not going to be able to deal with. I really think that political parties have to step up at this moment, forget for a moment about votes, forget for a moment about pragmatism, forget for a moment and think about what incidents are doing to the soul of our society. I don't know, what do we expect African Guyanese to do? What else can we ask them to do? Be more patient, turn the other cheek. What is it? You know, there is something ethnic groups fight over three things. They fight over economic, political, and cultural power. They fight over the honor of the group. The honor of the group. That you can give them political power, economic power, social power, if they feel that their honor is being nailed, they are not going to behave nicely. And thirdly, of course, ethnic groups fight over disenfranchisement. If groups feel that they live in a country in which they are economically and politically disenfranchised, they behave badly. That's what the studies have shown. And African Guyanese are economically disenfranchised. They're politically disenfranchised because their party has to go to elections with a list that is rigged against them. And now we are threatening their very honor by calling them black monkeys and so forth. I am afraid we are in for something in Guyana that none of us, including political parties, are going to be able to control. That's my 2 cents. And I'm saying to the political parties, you all had better begin to deal with this issue as a frontal issue, because everything will be lost. The oil, everything will be lost if we don't deal with this question of shaming people because of their ethnic group, because of their skin color, and because of their race. Tabitha, Chauvin said their party doesn't recognize Mr. Hicken. Does your party recognize him?
Quite frankly, no, we can't recognize him. But so that is the issue. We think he's there illegally. I think I don't know if he recognizes it, but I think he has been placed in a very peculiar position, and I'm not sure why it is he would want to place himself in that position. What does it mean to wait a couple more mornings and engage the opposition and ensure that you're there in a proper manner? And the fact that he is willing to go through a process that would have the population seeing him as illegal, why would you put that on yourself? And so that is where, Dr. Hines, I am at my end almost as to where our society is going. Because on the one hand, it appears as though the PPP does not care about the Constitution. They do not care about rule of law. They do not care about morals and keeping things in a particular order. Once they have power, they will use it in their own interest, no matter what comes. And so we have the rest of society looking on and expecting a response to what the PPP is doing. And as we have right now, we're not really getting much of a response. So we get the PPP acting sometimes outside of what they should be at, where they should be acting, and we're getting no response. And what that does, it tells society that it's okay, one, for the PPP to continue doing what they're doing. It's okay, two, for persons to discriminate, disenfranchise a particular group of people. And so we are in a place now where it's like, it's a heyday for one group of people in the country, and the rest of us just have to shut up and put up. Yes, I'm part of I'm a member of parliament. I have a political party, and I recognize that if it is that we are going to deal effectively with what is before us, we have to be on the those who are we consider some right thinking Guyanese. We have to be united. We have to come together, strategize, and determine how it is we are going to respond to what is happening. I don't see enough of that happening. I'm afraid to say that I don't see enough of that happening. I see a lot of persons finding ways to tear down each other, finding ways to say to each other that we are not enough, we're not doing enough, we're not where we should be, we're not who we should be, instead of coming together, recognizing that we have to be united in this particular matter and having all cards and all hands on deck to respond to what the PPP is doing. As it is right now, that is not what we're doing. We seem to be happy with fighting each other rather than coming together and dealing with what is happening on the other side. And it's heartrending, because if we don't deal with it now, we're only going to get worse. The situation is going to get worse because the PP is not interested in the unified Guyana. They're not interested in the interest of African Guyanese. I'm not even too sure they're interested in the interest of any Guyanese other than themselves and their friends and their cronies. And so if it is that we don't do what we need to get our acts together, the situation will only get worse. And we talk about next elections. I'll be quite frank. We're talking about next elections, and we're talking about what is happening with the voters list and GCOM and all of that. All of that would mean nothing if the society isn't in a place where they recognize that their leaders are defending the interests of their people. And at this particular point, I'm not seeing that.
Sherwin, your party is, and obviously the spotlight is on your party for obvious reasons. You are the largest party in the opposition. And your party has had a torrid time since the election, having to deal with a rampant party, but having to deal with internal dynamics. The news this week suggests that your party may have crossed a very important hurdle and settled the question of member of parliaments, and no doubt will, in a week's time, settle the problem of the leader of the opposition. Are we now going to see a more focused PNC?
Yes, precisely. I believe over the last few months, there were a number of internal hurdles that we had to cross, and also some external ones at the same time. I'm quite happy now that in a week's time we can have our leader there in Parliament, and the expectation is that he will become the leader of the opposition. Through that office, there will be, obviously, you would know, Dr. Hines, there so certain advantages being the leader of the opposition, while at the same time there are advantages being just the leader of the party. So you can, you have to wait. You have to wait. But to my mind, nothing happens before it's time. I'm that kind of person. I think that way. Nothing happens before it's time. I believe the 3-4 months that passed without the leader becoming the leader of the opposition, it allowed him to focus internally on the PNC and to cross those many hurdles within the party. So now that that has been streamlined, I think he's now ready to head into Parliament and to lead this coalition, and to really push back and to hold the government accountable. And I'm excited. I think all of us are excited. Clearly, there is an advantage with him going to Parliament in terms of certain resources, and we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to a more vibrant party in Parliament, and there's much that can be achieved at that legislative level, and we're looking forward to it.
You obviously have been moving around the country as chairman of the party and so forth. Are you satisfied that you all are making ground as far as healing the kind of schisms that occurred between the party and the followers after the election?
Certainly. We've been going from region to region. We've touched maybe I've been to maybe about 7 of the 10 regions already. The leader has been to maybe six or 7, maybe the same number. And based on what is happening on the ground, I think we're making a lot of progress. Supporters are coming home back. They're beginning to understand what exactly transpired. They're beginning to look to this new leadership, understand the vision of the new leadership and where we want to carry our party and the coalition as a whole. We would have had our Congress just a few days ago, and I was quite happy to see so many persons that you would not have seen at the PNC office for maybe even up to a decade, and you saw a number of persons there that are willing to support the party once again, willing to contribute in whatever way they can. And to me, that said a lot. To me, I think we're heading in the right direction. We're not without our mistakes, Dr. Hines. There are a number of mistakes. Some have to be made, in order for us to learn from it. We ourselves have to learn from our own mistakes as leaders, as new leaders of the party. But I'm confident that we're coming together nicely. And now with the news of the leader going to Parliament, I think it's definitely we're moving towards where we want to be.
And Tabitha Sarbo, your closing thoughts?
Thank you. Well, just to move on from where Sherwin left off, I just read that the CEO of GCOM has acknowledged the letter from the leader of the list, and Mr. Aubrey Norton and Ms. Waldo Lawrence will now be joining us in Parliament. So at least that hurdle has finally been crossed, and we can deal with the parliamentary level and get an opposition leader and move forward on that front. And I'm happy that has been resolved at this particular stage. It took a while, but we finally, I think we finally have dealt with that particular matter. But I would like to say that while that is good, I think that on various levels, in various spheres of influence, and there are a lot of things that still need to be done so that we are on the right track. The PNC has a very huge part to play in the direction that the opposition goes. And so while it is that I may not be part of the PNC and the AFC is not part of the PNC, you recognize that they have a role to play, and the strength of the PNC is very important to the coalition and to the country. And so a strong PNC is always what is needed and necessary in terms of when we deal with the opposition politics, yes. And in a unified country, we need the political parties to be as strong as they can to respond to what is happening right now. And so what Sherwin has just said in terms of people coming back to the PNC, I think should be taken in good stead, and we see where that leads the entire coalition in the next 3 years before we get to next elections. But I would just like to say quite publicly to everyone that all hands have to be on deck here. I'm hoping that the season of fighting and tearing down each other ends, and that we recognize that it was only through unity and coming together then we could actually deal with the PPP and deal with them in a manner that would see betterment for all Guyanese and not just half of the population.
And on that note, let me thank you, Tabitha, and thank Sherwin, chairman of the PNC, for coming on tonight and giving your perspectives on the issues of the day. Thank you all very much, and I'll be seeing you all in about 2 weeks' time. And to you, the audience, I want to say thank you for staying with us as usual, and I'll see you guys tomorrow night when we're going to be talking oil and the economy. Good night.
It is time for change in the Guyana Teachers Union, and 2 candidates, Vanessa Kissoon and Coretta McDonald, are running for President and General Secretary respectively. Listen, as they tell us why teachers across the country should vote for them in the election.
You're running for president of the Guyana Teachers Union. Why are you running?
I believe that it is time that the Guyana Teachers Union and teachers get the type of representation that they deserve. I believe that it is time that teachers be respected. And I honestly believe, Dr. Hines, that I am the person to take the Guyana Teachers Union and the teachers of this beloved country forward and into the future.
What have you learned about your stint as General Secretary that makes you want to continue?
Coretta McDonald is a part of a team, and I've been promoting team. The fact that you're asking me this question about what I've learned, I have learned to be even more resolute against this regime. I've learned that. I want to say to teachers, on that ballot paper, you're going to see the various positions. So you'll have president, you have 2 names there. Look for Vanessa Kissoon, put your X right there. For first vice president, you're going to see 2 names. Look for Lesmin Collins, put your tick there. For second vice president, you're going to see 2 names. Put your tick to one of those 2 names. Then you're going to see the position of General Secretary. You know where you have to put that, Coretta McDonald.
Vote Vanessa Kissoon for President of the Guyana Teachers Union and Coretta McDonald for General Secretary.